Hey there. Welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 383. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is my Marvel Legends collection. Again, now in my last episode that I posted about a week ago, I shot my introduction and I said I was going to show you my entire Marvel Legends collection, which I did. But the other part of that video was also to rearrange my Marvel Legends shelves. So I have one shelf devoted to my heroes and another shelf devoted to my villains. So I showed you my collection, and then I kind of pulled all the figures down and showed you what they looked like, up close, and then I was going to put them all back on the shelves. Now that took a little bit longer than I anticipated, so I only got to show you my heroic shelf. So today is a part two, and I'm going to take apart my villain shelf and put it back together again. And actually, in the week since I shot my heroic shelf, I do have a new addition. I just got Sunspot yesterday, so I still got to open this guy up, and he's now going to go on my mutant shelf along with the other New Mutants characters like Mirage and Karma. But otherwise, let's take a look at that collection. So just as a reminder, here is my heroic shelf. So you can see I've got all my Spider-Mans, all my Iron Mans, mutants, including Sunspot in his new home. More mutants, Captain America, Spider-Man adjacent, and then from here on out, it's a lot of miscellaneous Avengers, Cosmic Heroes, Fantastic Four, things like that. So all my heroic characters are rearranged on my shelf. My villains, however, I've started stripping my shelf, and I've got a lot of them piled up here on the floor. So I'm going to go through these guys, and then we'll put them all back up. And that's the focus of today's video. Now, I was all set to start showing you my evil Marvel Legends, beginning with Green Goblin, one of my all-time favorite characters. And then something occurred to me that I thought, well, maybe I'll give you a quick little bit of background on my history of collecting Marvel action figures. I grew up, knowing who Spider-Man was almost right out of the womb. The cartoons and the TV shows were playing. I don't even have memories of probably when I first was introduced to Spider-Man. I had him on like bed sheets. I had him on to this day, I've got this garbage can here under my desk, which I've had since the early 80s. So I've just always known who Spider-Man was. And the Green Goblin was my favorite villain from the get-go. This was my first Green Goblin action figure, perhaps my first Marvel action figure. This guy is as old as I am. It was made in 1978. He's seen better days. You can see his arms broken off. He's all scuffed up. Anyway, this was my first toy. I loved this guy. And I actually didn't get into collecting comic books until 1986. And by that time, I learned that my favorite character, the Green Goblin, was long dead. And he had been replaced by a new character called the Hobgoblin. And I wanted Marvel toys so bad, but there was really no Marvel toys to play with, especially not a big, wide roster of characters, which is something I always wanted. The first Marvel toys that came out that like me and my brother Doug, we collected toys together, and the Secret Wars toys, like this Hobgoblin here, were the first ones on the market. But there was only about 20 figures in that entire line. There was no Green Goblin because he was dead at the time, so Hobgoblin got a figure. Then in the early 90s, these figures came along. There wasn't too many in this collection either, but you can see they're non-articulated. They're just solid plastic, not very well sculpted. But me and my brother collected a bunch of these. But because we wanted to play with Marvel Universe characters, we actually ended up creating paper dolls of pretty much every Marvel character in the Marvel Handbook. So we had hundreds of paper doll action figures that we played with like action figures. It wasn't until the 90s, a little bit later into the 90s, when Toy Biz picked up the license and they started making new figures based on the new animated series. So they had X-Men figures, Spider-Man figures, Avengers, Silver Surfer, all kinds of properties that spun out of it. But Spider-Man, X-Men were their main ones, and I gobbled up this Spider-Man toy line from Toy Biz. I love these figures. Whoops. And this Green Goblin, to this day, I think is the best Green Goblin figure ever made. I just love it. His articulation could be better, whatever, but I love the sculpt of this guy. I love the design of that Green Goblin. Near the end of Toy Biz's run, they switched over to like a different style of figures. They started getting a little bit more detail. They kind of became what is known as the Marvel, not quite Marvel Legends yet, but Spider-Man Classics and stuff like that. here's a Toy Biz Green Goblin, which I love. This guy is from the storyline Revenge of the Green Goblin, which was one of the first stories featuring the original Green Goblin after he had returned from the dead during the infamous Clone Saga. Anyway, then I've got this Green Goblin, who's not very articulated. This is from Marvel Select. And then I started collecting the 3 3/4 inch figures. And so I was all in on this line. I have tons of these little figures. Even though, the 6-inch figures were continuing, I didn't like a lot of the early Marvel Legends. I just thought they were way too articulated. All their fingers and toes were articulated. They ended up looking really gangly and weird. So I focused on these little guys. And I also picked up other odds and ends. Like here you can see a couple of weird lines here. I also collected some like what were they, Mini Mates and like Funko Pops. So, I have Marvel characters in all kinds of different formats. Again, I have a ton of the small ones. I have a ton of these 90s ones. And I was a little leery about getting into the 6-inch Marvel Legends because I had missed so many of them and I didn't like their design. But around 2014, Hasbro had taken over the rights to Marvel Legends from Toy Biz, and the first few lines weren't very good. But around 2014 is when they kind of turned things around and started making really quality Marvel Legends figures, and that's when I saw the potential of kind of getting in with Marvel Legends and starting to build up a whole new collection from there. And that brings us up to my Marvel Legends collection. So in 2014, the year that I began collecting Marvel Legends, they had a Build-A-Figure wave where you had to collect 5 or 6 different figures and you could build this figure, the Ultimate Green Goblin. Now, even though Green Goblin is my favorite character, I didn't really care for Ultimate Green Goblin. I don't love this big hulked out version with the horns. But anyway, I collected most of the figures in that wave. So I got his head and his torso and both of his legs. But I didn't buy the 2 figures that I needed to get his arms. But there was another Build-A-Figure wave consisting of Captain America figures. And if you collected all of them, you could get the pieces to build the Mandroid. Now, I only bought a couple figures from the Mandroid wave, but it just so happened that I got the 2 figures that came with Mandroid arms. So I stuck them on my Ultimate Green Goblin, so now he's got these kind of armored arms or robotic arms, and this is how I display him on my shelf. Now this guy here, even though he doesn't really count, because this guy's from about 10 years earlier, I think he came out in like 2004 from Toy Biz, I just love this design so much. It's like Humberto Ramos's art just leapt right off the page, and it's such a radical different redesign for Green Goblin, kind of Lord of the Rings inspired to look like an orc or something. And he's still to scale with my current figures, so I keep him on my shelf. It's not too often I have a figure this old out on display, but Green Goblin makes the cut. Now this here was the first Green Goblin in the modern Marvel Legends, and I bought it, again, because I love the character, but I did not love this figure. I really didn't love the head sculpt. I think it's a little weird. I think they tried to lean into the Lord of the Rings look a little bit too much, and I didn't like it here. Anyway, then we got this animated one, which is pretty cool. I still don't think it's as good as the Toy Biz one from the 90s, but it's pretty great. And then this one here, this is probably the best one they've done to date, although I don't like the eyes on the Green Goblin face, so I actually display him like this, with the Norman Osborn unmasked face, and then he's just holding his mask in his hands. So these are all different versions of Norman Osborn. I do have one other Norman Osborn on my shelf, but I don't have him with these guys because he's in a different costume, and we'll cover him later. Now here we have another batch of goblins. This here is the Hobgoblin, and I love the Hobgoblin almost as much as I love the Green Goblin, except I think this is a terrible figure. Again, I hate that head sculpt. That does not look like any version of the Hobgoblin that I know. So this is one of the characters most in need of an update. Now, they actually did do another version of Hobgoblin since this, and it was supposed to be based on the 90s cartoon. And he's in brighter colors, and his cape isn't full of holes, and they got rid of the chainmail and just gave him smooth arms and legs, but they kept the same head sculpt, which was a huge bummer. So much so that I didn't bother buying it again because I already dislike this head sculpt. This Hobgoblin, I think, is great, and it again is based off of the artwork of Humberto Ramos, one of my favorite Spider-Man artists. And but you can see this is a different look than the classic Hobgoblin. This is a different character entirely. This is Phil Urich. So it's a great figure, but I still want a classic Hobgoblin. And at one point, Hobgoblin shared a body with a demon, and then they were split apart, and the demon half of him became the Demo Goblin. So this is a pretty nice version of the Demo Goblin. Pretty cool. Yeah, those are my goblins. I actually do have one more goblin as well, but he's going to show up later, so keep your eyes peeled. Now, this assortment is all my different versions of Jack-O-Lantern. Now, he's kind of an obscure Spider-Man villain, but he's actually one of my very favorites. When I started buying the comic books, Jack-O-Lantern was actually a pretty prominent villain, and I've wanted a cool Jack-O-Lantern action figure for so long. Now, they did make one in the 90s Toy Biz line, but he wasn't quite right because he had a little nose carved in his Jack-O-Lantern. And you'll notice on these other versions, he doesn't have a nose. It's just eyes and a mouth, which is how I feel he is supposed to look. That's my preferred version. And then this guy came out. So this is actually a Toy Biz figure, but it's closer to the Marvel Legends style than the old cartoony ones. So this figure is actually from 2006. So it's another old one that I have displayed with my current figures. But if you take a look at him, you can probably see what I mean with the gangliness. Like he's got the articulated toes, and the way his legs connect and his arms connect to his torso with those kind of ball joints, it looks a little inhuman. Like, I just did not love the design of these figures, but I did like Jack-O-Lantern, so I picked him up. When I started collecting Marvel Legends proper, we did get this Jack-O-Lantern. It's pretty cool. I love the head sculpt, but this body design and the fact that he comes with a flaming broomstick, that is not the version of Jack-O-Lantern that I love from the 80s. This is a more modern interpretation of the character. It's a whole different character under the mask, actually, and he was like one of Venom's enemies. I really wanted a classic 80s Spider-Man, and we did get one last year, I believe, which was this Jack-O-Lantern, which I think is just perfect. It's exactly how I remember him from the 80s, and this guy actually went on to become Hobgoblin after the original Hobgoblin was killed. So, yeah, there is a Goblin connection here, and I just love my Jack-O-Lanterns. Now let's start taking a look at some of Spider-Man's most classic villains. And you don't get much more classic than the Chameleon, who first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 1. So this Chameleon's a little bit older. This is him in kind of a standard suit. And then this one is based off of the 90s animated look. So both good figures. Then we've got the Vulture in his classic green tights and wings. He actually came with two different head sculpts. One with the classic bald head and one with the cowl here. I kind of like the cowl, even though it's less well known. And then we've got this young version of the Vulture based on the 90s animated series and the comic book story Life Theft. Here's a couple more classic villains. We've got another member of the original Sinister Six here with Kraven the Hunter. I believe they've done 3 versions of Kraven. I have 2 of them. I don't think they've quite nailed him yet. Like, I like this contemporary look of this figure, except I don't like the head sculpt. The hair and the beard looks a little too much like Tony Stark. He looks a little too young to be Kraven. This one here, he looks a little too maniacal, a little too Purple Pie Man, mustache twirling guy. I'd like to see this body, but with just a different head. And then Scorpion, he's a great figure. This one here, where the mask like wraps right around his lips, that's reminds me of like the Todd McFarlane version of Scorpion. And then we've got this one here, which I think looks fantastic. One of my other favorite 90s Toy Biz Spider-Man figures was their version of the Scorpion, and I'm really glad that we got an updated version of that figure here. So this is from the animated Spider-Man line, and he looks awesome. Here are some more classic Stan Lee, Steve Ditko Spider-Man villains. And I am realizing that, just like in every other video I do, I'm talking too much. There's no way I'm going to go through my entire villains collection if I spend this much time talking about each character. So we're going to have to speed things along. Anyway, here we have the Sandman. Version 1 was a Build-A-Figure. Version 2, I like better. Lizard, this first one, also a Build-A-Figure. Really good figure, but more dinosaur-like than lizardy, I think. Then we got this cartoon-based one, much more classic-looking lizard, and I love it. So there you go. Some more classic Spidey villains. Here we have the Rhino. This is a pretty great figure. Now, I have him displayed with a more contemporary style head. I probably should put the classic head on him, but I really do like this look. They did release a more animated style figure of him, but it was a little too pricey. And the Rhino, he's not one of my favorites, so I didn't feel the need to update him. Electro, I quite like. This first version of Electro was kind of a more contemporary look, where he has the scars on his face, the black pants. But then they did release this classic version of Electro sometime later. And then most recently, we got the female version of Electro. So I lumped her in here with these classic characters. Now, these are probably the last of what I would call the truly classic Spider-Man villains. I'm talking about characters from his first year or two of publication. So, of course, we've got Dr. Octopus, arguably his main villain. Then we've got this really cool version of Dr. Octopus from the animated series. Then we've got Mysterio. And I've actually got a Mysterio from the animated series on pre-order. He should be here in about 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool. So let's move on to some of Spidey's second tier of villains, or the B-list villains. So most of these guys are members of teams like the Sinister Syndicate, or the Deadly Foes, or the Superior Foes. Anyway, here we have Boomerang. This character is in desperate need of a remake. Not only is this figure quite old, but this is not his classic costume. We have never received a Boomerang figure in his classic costume. So, desperate need of a remake. Here we've got Hydro Man, Speed Demon, and a classic Shocker, as well as a more contemporary Shocker. And here we have another member of the Sinister Syndicate. I believe he was their leader, actually. So this here is the Beetle. I actually have the same character on my heroic shelf because he later became Mach 5, the heroic character of the Thunderbolts. This here is the new Beetle that replaced him. So this is a female version, and it's not his daughter, but it's actually Tombstone's daughter. And then here we have another version of the Beetle from the Ultimate Universe. Speaking of Tombstone, let's take a look at some of Spidey's gangster villains. So here we have Tombstone in his more mob boss attire. Here he is when he's more of a henchman. Then we've got Hammerhead and Mr. Negative, both of whom are crime bosses. And then we've got Mr. Negative's henchman, the Inner Demon. And you can't talk about crime bosses in the Marvel Universe without, of course, talking about the Kingpin of Crime, who was a Spidey villain before he ever was a Daredevil villain. Then we've got the Kingpin's son, the Rose, and Silvermane. This was another old man who was a gangster, and they put his head on a robotic cyborg body. And at one point, when his body was destroyed, they put his head on a little remote-controlled car. Here are some more Spidey villains. Now, so many of Spidey villains have been redeemed either fully or partially over the years. This here is a collection of guys that aren't quite bad guys. Like here we have Morbius, the living vampire. Now this figure here is based off of his kind of look when he fought Spider-Man. This look here is based off of his own look when he got his own comic book as the Star in the 90s. The Prowler here. I've got a couple different versions of him. He started out as a villain and then became an ally of Spider-Man. Currently, he is no longer the Prowler. Hobie Brown now goes by the name the Hornet. And Hobie Brown in an alternate universe is also the Spider-Punk. And then here we have another version of the Prowler, but this guy is from an alternate universe where he is Miles Morales' uncle. So if you've seen the Spider-Verse movies, you might be familiar with that version. And then here we have Man-Wolf, who is actually John Jameson, J. Jonah Jameson's son, who is an astronaut, but he turns into a werewolf and is sometimes a bad guy of Spider-Man. Some more random Spidey villains. So here we've got the Human Fly, the Tarantula, Morlun, Alistair Smythe, the Spider Slayer, and Puma. And here's another batch of Spider-Man villains. So we have Frogman, Hallows Eve, the Jackal, White Rabbit, the Molten Man, and Shriek. And for my last batch of Spider-Man villains, I have here some twisted versions of Spider-Man himself. So these two here are direct clones of Spider-Man using his DNA. So here we have Ben Reilly, who is sometimes known as the Scarlet Spider, but in this incarnation he is known as Chasm. Here we have Kane, the first failed clone of Spider-Man. This here is the cosmically created doppelganger of Spider-Man. During the comic book series called Infinity War, all the Marvel characters had doppelgangers, but Spider-Man's the only one who kind of stuck around in popularity. And lastly, we have the Superior Octopus. Now, this is actually Dr. Octopus in a clone body of Spider-Man. He took over Spider-Man's role and called himself the Superior Spider-Man for a while. But when the original came back and took over the mantle of Spider-Man, Doc Ock tried to go by the Superior Octopus, but that didn't really last very long, and he went back to his classic look. Now, some might argue that Venom is actually Spider-Man's greatest and most popular villain, but over the years, Venom has kind of transitioned into his own thing. He's got his own franchise, so I don't really consider him a Spider-Man villain anymore, but that's where his origins lied, which is why no matter how many Venom figures I get, this one remains my favorite. This one here looks just like Venom appeared in his first appearance as drawn by Todd McFarlane. I love that smile and those teeth. He didn't have a big crazy tongue or anything at this point in time. This is just a truly classic first appearance Venom, and I love it. Although some of these later versions of Venom, like this guy with the big long tongue, he's really cool too. This one here, this is the movie Venom. And since the movie Venom has no ties to Spider-Man, he does not have the famous spider logo on his chest because it really wouldn't make sense. This Venom looks pretty standard, but what's cool about this one is he actually came with giant bat wings, which is something that was established during Donny Cates' run on the Spider-Man comic book. However, he just takes up too much room to display with the wings on, so unfortunately I just display him like this. And then lastly, this is just another Venom figure, but I swapped out the head with this pig head that looks like Spider-Ham. That's because in the Spider-Ham comic books, he has a villain known as Pork Rind, which is basically just Venom with a pig head. So rather than have just another Venom on here, I decided to display Pork Rind on my collection. And here we have some more Venoms. So this is Venom here when he's really kind of hulked out in his big monstrous form. And here we have Venom colored blue based on the Capcom video game. Now, all these versions of Venom that I've showed you so far are all based on Eddie Brock. That's the character that you know from the Venom movies. He was the first and current host of Venom. Over here, we've got three other versions of Venom. This is known as Agent Venom when he was more militaristic. And then we've got two versions of Space Knight Venom when he was a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, these three versions of Venom were actually Flash Thompson, Spider-Man's old high school nemesis, turned soldier, turned Venom. So yeah, lots of cool different variations of this character. So Venom, of course, brings us to his alien offspring. This here is another symbiote by the name of Carnage. So this here is a very classic looking Carnage, just like he looked in his first appearance in the comic book and in the cartoons in the 90s. Then we've got a more modern version, kind of how he appeared in the, I think it was Absolute Carnage comic books. This is the movie Carnage, as portrayed by Woody Harrelson. And lastly, this is Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who I mentioned earlier, when he merged with the Carnage symbiote and became the Red Goblin. So that was the other goblin that I told you to watch for. And here we have a few more symbiotes. So here we have two different versions of Toxin, both this big hulking version and a little more normal-sized version. Now, this here is Anti-Venom, as he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man. So when Eddie Brock, the original Venom, lost the symbiote and it went to Flash Thompson, and he became Agent Venom, the more militaristic version of Venom. They didn't want Eddie Brock to do nothing, so they turned him into this new character, Anti-Venom. So that way we still had kind of a normal, classic-looking Venom character, just with the colors reversed, and we also had the new militaristic Venom. But when the alien symbiote went back to Eddie Brock and he became the classic Venom again, Marvel didn't want to do with their cool new creation of Agent Venom, so Flash Thompson, he took over the Anti-Venom suit and he became Agent Anti-Venom. So now I've got this guy in white and black as well. And when Flash Thompson was the Agent Venom, he took on an apprentice here in this character because he was a high school gym teacher or something, and this was one of his students, and this is Mania. Here we have what are known as the Life Foundation symbiotes. So in the comic books, Venom was the first alien symbiote. And then one day it spawned and left a little symbiote behind, and that's how Carnage was created. Once the Life Foundation, an evil corporation, found out that Venom was capable of spawning, they kidnapped the original symbiote and pulled out all of its seeds, which it's only supposed to do like once in a generation, but it managed to pull them all out and create this new army of symbiotes. So here we have Riot, who was actually the villain in the first live-action Venom movie. And we've got Lasher, Phage, Scream, and Agony. And here are the last of my symbiotes. So this here is Superior Venom. So I mentioned earlier about how Dr. Octopus took over Spider-Man's body to become Superior Spider-Man. Well, the Superior Spider-Man got infected by Venom and became Superior Venom. So this is actually Spider-Man and Venom and Dr. Octopus all mashed together. Then we've got this venomized version of Captain America. This was from the storyline Venomized, where a bunch of Marvel characters got possessed by symbiotes. This character here is from the same storyline. I forget what this deals, like his name is Poison, and it's not really a character on its own. It's like a whole alien race, and they're kind of like anti-symbiotes or something. It's not actually a symbiote on its own. I can't remember exactly. This here is Venom Pool. So this is just kind of a stupid crossover between Venom and Deadpool. And then this last guy here, this isn't actually a symbiote, but this here is Null. He is the king of the symbiotes. I believe he might have created them, but he certainly rules over them. So I figured I'd lump him in with these guys. So now let's take a look at some X-Men villains. X-Men have some pretty cool looking villains. They also have some very large villains that take up a lot of room on the shelf. So let's start with Mojo, this big fat creepy guy who's like obsessed with TV and he kidnaps the X-Men for entertainment purposes. Then we've got Nimrod. This guy is like a sentinel from the future. And then we've got Sauron, who was like a mad scientist that turned himself into a dinosaur guy. So yeah, all pretty cool looking, all pretty convoluted backstories. Here are some more oversized X-Men villains. So we've got the Blob and 3 different versions of Apocalypse. This one here, the colors are based off of the animated look. This one here is from the storyline Age of Apocalypse. And this is kind of his more classic early appearances design. And this one here was a Build-A-Figure. Here we have a few more oversized X-Men villains. So both the Juggernaut and Onslaught are quite large. And then we have Mr. Sinister and Strife. They're bigger than your average figure, but these guys are starting to shrink down to the more average figure size. Here are some more X-Men villains. Now, I don't know as much about X-Men lore as I do Spider-Man, so forgive me if I get some details wrong here. But this here is Omega Red. I think he is essentially kind of a standalone villain, as well as the Silver Samurai. Spiral, she is associated with Mojo, but I believe she was also a member of Freedom Force. And then we've got the Executioner, who I remember was introduced during the annual storyline Executioner song, but I remember very little about him. Now, I believe these are all the other members of Freedom Force, at least the ones that have been made into action figures. Some of them were also on the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, I believe. But again, whatever. We've got Avalanche, Pyro, Mystique, and Destiny. More X-Men villains. Here we have Sabretooth, who is most famously Wolverine's arch enemy. This is kind of his 90s look, and this is him from the Age of Apocalypse storyline. Now, I love the character Sabretooth, but I don't think they've made a good figure of him yet. I don't really care for either of these ones. I actually really wanted an action figure of him, how he appeared in the early 80s, before he was even associated with the X-Men, back when he used to fight Spider-Man. And they actually did make a figure of that look, but they did such a terrible job on his face sculpt that I didn't even buy it. So I'm still waiting for a great Sabretooth figure. Now, Sabretooth was a member of the Marauders. There's one other member of the Marauders that they've done, and that is Vertigo. I really want to see the other members of this team in action figure form. I don't know if they'll ever get around to them, but fingers crossed. And then here we have Zero. Now, he is the only member of the Mutant Liberation Front that has had an action figure, other than his leader, Strife, which I showed you earlier. But yeah, there's probably another dozen members of this team that could be done in action figure form, but so far, Hasbro has not done it. Here we have some classic X-Men villains known as the Hellfire Club. I think there's still a member or two that I'm missing, but the four main characters, these ones here, so Sebastian Shaw, Donald Pierce, Selena, the Black Queen, and Emma Frost, the White Queen, they came together in a box set, which I think was a convention exclusive. And then this here is Jean Grey, when she served as the Black Queen. So this was an alternate head that came in the package. I have the head displayed on an alternate Emma Frost body. And then over here we have the Hellfire Trooper. Now, besides being a member of the Hellfire Club, Donald Pierce, who I just showed you, he also led a team of cyborgs known as the Reavers. And here I have four of the members. So this here is Skullbuster, Pretty Boy. I believe this guy's name is Reese. And this head actually just came as an extra piece with this figure, so you could display it with either one of the heads. I put it on an extra Deadpool body, so I could display Reese as his own character. And then we have Lady Deathstrike. And here's the last of my X-Men villains. These guys are kind of, I guess we'll call them miscellaneous, including the X-Men's greatest villain, Magneto. Now, there have been lots of versions of Magneto over the years. I quite like this one, but I really do need to get one in his classic red and purple outfit. It seems kind of weird that this is the only Magneto I have in my collection. This guy's name is Vulcan. He is the brother of Cyclops and Havoc. Kind of a boring character. Black Tom. I don't care much about this guy either. He pals around with Juggernaut. This is the Goblin Queen, a figure I was quite excited to receive last year, as she is from the storyline Inferno, which is one of my favorites from when I was a kid. Arcade, he's a great character too. Now, I have him displayed with his longer hair, which is not his well-known look, but I really liked when he appeared this way in the Avengers Arena comic book, so I've chose to display him with the long hair instead of the short hair. And then lastly, we have a Wolverine possessed by the Brood. And yeah, a pretty cool collection of characters. Now this figure here, this is not actually a Marvel Legend figure. This is the Sentinel figure from the 3 3/4 inch Marvel Universe line. But he stands at 12 inches tall, so he's quite large compared to the 3 3/4 inch figures. But they did make a much larger Sentinel for the Marvel Universe line, but he was too expensive. The Sentinel's not a character that I absolutely love, So I figure this one, even though he's a little undersized, he's still pretty big, and he works. So I display this guy with my Marvel Legends. So now that we're done with the mutants, let's slide over to the cosmic side of Marvel, starting with one of my favorite villains, Thanos. So you can see I have quite a few different versions here. This one here is actually a Marvel Select figure that I've probably had for 15 years or so, but it holds up great. I think it looks really good, so I keep it on my current shelf. Here we have a Marvel Legends Thanos. This guy is basically a perfect version of the Infinity Gauntlet appearance. I really like it. I didn't think I would ever need another Thanos after I bought this, but then they put this one out this year, which is based on the Capcom video game, and I just love the colors and the new face sculpt and all that stuff, so I had to get this one. This is a Thanos figure. This was my first version of him in the Marvel Legends. You know, it worked at the time. It's a more contemporary outfit, but I hate the way his shoulder pads like float around. So yeah, I was very happy to replace it with these later versions. And then lastly, this guy here probably shouldn't even really be displayed on my shelf, but it's a Build-A-Figure cobbled together from, I think, 4 different other figures. This old man Thanos head sculpt was actually a bonus piece that came with this figure. And then you'll see the chest, that arm, and that leg are all from one Build-A-Figure where I did not get all the parts. This arm here is a darker purple. That's from another Thanos Build-A-Figure. And lastly, I have a Colossus leg here. So he's totally just cobbled together. But it still kind of works as a Thanos from the far-flung future, which is what that head is supposed to represent. And I could believe that maybe he has a cybernetic leg in the future. And so anyway, he looks fine when he's on the back of my shelf, kind of hidden away. Here we have some more Marvel Cosmic bad guys, including Terrax, Ronan the Accuser, 2 different versions of the Super Skrull, and the Kree Sentry Build-A-Figure. Here is some more Cosmic Marvel. So we've got the Beyonder, Ex Nihilo, Titus, the Fallen One, which is one of the Heralds of Galactus. Now this here is Death. Now she was actually an accessory that came with my Marvel Select Thanos. So she's actually not a Marvel Legend, and she's not even really an action figure because she has no articulation. But I don't imagine we're going to get an actual action figure of Lady Death anytime soon. So since this one is to scale, I display it with my Marvel Legends. And lastly, this is the evil version of Adam Warlock, known as Magus. Now, this head actually just came with an Adam Warlock figure, so you could choose to display it with either the good head or the bad head. But I had this extra pirate Deadpool body that I didn't really need laying around because I didn't need a pirate Deadpool in my collection. And I actually think it looks pretty good with the Magus head. So this way I could display both Adam Warlock and the Magus in my collection. And so there you go. Now, I don't know if we would really consider this batch of characters to be cosmic. Some of them are pretty Earth-based, but they're all pretty big and powerful. And, you know, when they attack the Marvel Universe, it can have pretty big worldwide ramifications. So I'll put them up there as at least pretty close to cosmic. Now, the Watcher here, he is definitely a cosmic character. I wouldn't say he's a villain. He's pretty neutral. If anything, I'd say he fits more in with the heroic shelf, but I forgot to include him in my last video. So this here is the Marvel Select version, not a Marvel Legend, but it's much better than the Marvel Legend figure that they released. So I like to display this figure. Then we've got Kang the Conqueror. So he's an Avengers villain. He's a time traveler, so he, causes all kinds of havoc in the Marvel Universe when he's traveling through time. The Psycho Man, I believe he inhabits the Microverse. So he has battled characters like the Micronauts and the Fantastic Four, the Silver Surfer. So I guess we can consider him a villain of cosmic proportions. The High Evolutionary, he was featured in Guardians of the Galaxy version 3. So even though most of the adventures I've read with him have been Earth-based, he obviously can go cosmic. Molecule Man, another very powerful Marvel villain who I always found to be kind of lame. And then Ultron. he is one of the more powerful Marvel villains. Cosmic villains naturally bleed into Thor villains because, Thor takes place in outer space, essentially. So let's take a look at some Thor villains. So here we have the 12-inch figure of Surtur. Now, this is technically an MCU figure based on the movies. Now, I'm going to talk about all my movie figures and lump them together separate from my comic book versions. However, Surtur, we're never going to get a comic book version of him. So, I kind of consider him the comic book version. So that's why I keep him with these figures. Even if I had to get rid of all my MCU figures to clear out space, I would hold on to this guy. So, pretty cool figure. Then we've got the Destroyer. And we've got Ulik the Troll. These are all pretty large figures. And then we get down here to Gore the God Butcher. Here we have some more Thor villains, including classic villains such as Loki, Malekith the Dark Elf, and the Enchantress. And then a couple evil versions of Thor, including Ragnarok, the evil clone, and the Dark Winter, which is a cosmic entity that took the form of Thor. In my Marvel Heroes video, I lumped characters like Ghost Rider and Blade and Moon Knight together under the banner of Midnight Suns. And that's probably what I would do with this group of villains here. They're not necessarily connected, but they all operate in the darker corners of the Marvel Universe. So here we have Despair, the Hood, who is involved in the occult. We've got the Ghost Rider villain, the Orb. Then we've got Blackheart, who is the son of Mephisto. Then we've got Dracula and Lilith. I don't have too many villains that I would associate directly with the Hulk, but I do have these three here. So we've got the Leader, the Zenmu Build-A-Figure, and even though there have been quite a few versions of the Abomination in the Marvel Legends series, I don't think any of them have been as nice as this Marvel Select version. So this is the version I choose to display in my collection. Here we have a handful of Daredevil villains. So I would say Bullseye is his arch nemesis. And then we have Lady Bullseye, who is a bit of a newer character. And then we have Typhoid Mary. This is one of the other figures in my collection that I think is most in need of an update. I'd really love to see a version that looks like John Romita Jr.'s artwork with the big puffy hair and everything. So fingers crossed we see that one day. And then we have Stiltman here, who was a Build-A-Figure where you could get multiple parts and make his stilts as long as you wanted to. But anyway, I have a couple of sets of stilts on my guy, and it makes for a pretty tall figure. Here we have some Iron Man villains, including Detroit Steel, the Crimson Dynamo, and the Marvel Select version of the Titanium Man. I'm hoping we get a nice Marvel Legends version of him soon. I would also like to see a classic version of the Crimson Dynamo. Here are some of Iron Man's less armored villains: Whiplash, Blizzard, Whirlwind, Spymaster, Madame Mask, and the Living Laser. Let's move on to some Doctor Strange villains. So here we have his arch nemesis Dormammu, the Mindless One, which was a Build-A-Figure a couple of years ago, and a recent acquisition. This is Shuma Gorath, or Gargantos, the giant tentacled creature. Here we have the Serpent Society. Now these guys are primarily Captain America villains. Now there's probably close to 20 members of the Serpent Society, and I really wish we'd get some more members. They just trickle members out over the years, one at a time. So here we have Puff Adder, the Eel, Cottonmouth, Rock Viper or Rock Python, and Cobra. So I would really like to see Diamondback, Death Adder, and Sidewinder. Now let's move on to some Captain America villains. So these here are all members of Hydra. Now, Hydra is a pain in the ass for pretty much everybody in the Marvel Universe, but they are primarily Captain America villains. So here we have the Red Skull, Baron von Strucker, Armin Zola, Madam Hydra or Viper, this guy, which is like a Hydra version of Captain America, and I forget what his name is right now. And then we've got a couple of generic Hydra soldiers. Here are some more Captain America villains. So we've got two versions of Crossbones. We've got Baron Zemo Jr. We've got Batroc the Leaper. And then we've got Zombie Captain America. Now, I don't know if I'd really call him a Captain America villain, because in an alternate universe, this actually is Steve Rogers, who has just been turned into a zombie. So I don't think he's ever actually interacted with another Captain America. But this just seems like a logical place to stick him. Now, I don't have much in the way of Fantastic Four villains, but I do have 5 different versions of Doctor Doom, all of which are pretty cool in their own right. The only other figures I have here that I would really associate as Fantastic Four villains are this Dragon Man, which is a pretty awesome deluxe-sized figure. And then this here is Galactus. This figure is actually from the 3 3/4 inch line of Marvel Universe figures. So when you display him next to a 3 3/4 inch figure, he's pretty impressive. But he's not as impressive next to a 6-inch figure. However, even though they did make a much larger Galactus to be to scale with my Marvel Legends, it was very expensive, and I think this one looks pretty great. It still towers over most of the figures in my collection, so I'm fine with just keeping this Galactus displayed with my Marvel Legends. Now we're on to what I would consider to be more generic Marvel villains. You could probably associate these guys with a particular Marvel hero, but most of them have fought multiple heroes over the years, and they're not really associated, in my mind at least, with any one guy. So here we have the Wendigo, who has fought the Hulk and Wolverine and Spider-Man. Then we've got the Controller. He's probably most associated with Iron Man. And then we've got Absorbing Man and his wife Titania, who probably the Hulk is who they are most associated with. Here are some more miscellaneous villains. I've got 3 Build-A-Figures here. So this here is Armadillo. This is Mr. Hyde. Now, you had to buy all the figures from the Shang-Chi movie wave in order to build this guy, and I bought most of them, but I didn't buy the one that came with his leg, but I did have a leg that worked. That leg comes from the Mr. Fix-It version of the Hulk. So yeah, he's got one mismatched leg, but when he's displayed on the back of a shelf, you can't tell that. And then here we have 3 members of the Winter Guard, which is kind of the Russian superhero team or supervillain team, depending on how you look at it. So the Build-A-Figure here, this bear, that's Ursa Major. Then we've got the Red Guardian, who you know from like the Thunderbolts movie. And then we've got Dark Star. Here we have 3 more villains, probably most likely associated with the Avengers or maybe Captain America. So here we have the Super Adaptoid, which has the powers of all the original Avengers. This here is MODOK. Now, this is kind of a silly version of MODOK. They did make a standard version, and then this here is like the Elvis version, which is dumb. It's from a comic book called Next Wave, which had kind of a comedic bend to it. The reason I ended up with this one is because it came packaged with the figure of the Captain that I wanted for my collection, and once I had the 2-pack, I really don't care about MODOK enough to purchase another version. I really didn't need 2. So even though I would rather have the standard MODOK in my collection, this Elvis version will have to do. And then here we have the kind of evil alter ego of the Sentry. This is the Void. Here we have a few more villains. So I've got 3 different versions of the Taskmaster. Then we've got Thundra, who could just as easily be displayed with the superheroes, I suppose. And then we've got Scourge. Now, this particular version of Scourge was a member of the Thunderbolts, and it's actually the character also known as Nuke. Now, they did release a Nuke figure before, but I passed on it. So I am glad to know that that character is in my collection under this mask. But what I'm really hoping for is another release of the original Scourge in his kind of like white skeleton gangster costume. Here we have the Gray Gargoyle, who I think is most associated with Iron Man, Tiger Shark, probably Namor the Submariner and the Avengers, the Grim Reaper, also an Avengers villain, and then we've got Bulldozer of the Wrecking Crew. He's kind of fought everybody, Thor, Hulk. Now, this is a pretty old figure. This one, I think, is from 2014, the year that I started collecting Marvel Legends. And he was the only member of the Wrecking Crew that I managed to get. The other 3 members were released kind of before my time. I would really like to see the Wrecking Crew redone. It's been a long time, and I really want to complete that team. Here we have 3 members of AIM. So AIM is Advanced Idea Mechanics. They are kind of a generic group of evil super scientists that often plague the Avengers and Captain America and guys like that. So we've got 2 nameless AIM scientists, and then we've got the Supreme AIM scientist. And then over here we've got the Red Widow, as well as the Yelena Belova version of the Black Widow. And this is the last of my kind of generic villains. So here we have Crossfire, I believe, Count Nefaria, who has fought the X-Men. He also leads the Mafia in the Marvel Universe. And then we have another crime boss here, most commonly associated with the Punisher. This is Jigsaw. And these are the last of the comic book Marvel Legends villains that I have to show you. So this here is the Dark Avengers. Now, at the beginning of this video, I showed you all my Green Goblins, and I told you that I did have another Norman Osborn in a different identity. So here is Norman Osborn as the Iron Patriot from the time that he led his own version of Avengers known as the Dark Avengers, in which case he took villains and dressed them up like heroes. So here we have Bullseye as Hawkeye. This here is Dakin, Wolverine's son, standing in for Wolverine. And here we have Moonstone as Captain Marvel. Now, I've also thrown in the other version of Moonstone in her like supervillain costume up here as well. Now, this is pretty much the main team. The only one missing here is the Dark Avengers version of Spider-Man, which was actually the Scorpion wearing the Venom symbiote. And that figure is, I currently have it on pre-order, so soon I will have my dark version of Spider-Man as well. Now, there were a couple other characters on this team, such as Ares and Sentry and Marvel Boy. I have figures of all those characters, but I have those all displayed on my heroic shelf because those guys are kind of, they walk the line. They're in the gray area. So, yeah, I would have showed you them in my last video. So now we're on to my MCU figures. So these are the ones based on the movies. So here we have Crow from the Eternals. This figure here, again, it predates 2014 when I started collecting Marvel Legends. This was from the Iron Man movie line, which wasn't really part of Marvel Legends when it came out in like 2008 or 2009. This is the Ironmonger. And here we have Cull Obsidian. This is one of the children of Thanos. They did make all of them into action figure form, but this is the only guy I have. He was a Build-A-Figure. And you'll notice I am missing one of his arms, so I have him displayed with an extra Caliban arm that I had laying around. Here we have some MCU Spider-Man villains, such as the Molten Man, as well as the Vulture and Mysterio. Here are my MCU Captain America villains, such as the Red Skull, Baron Zemo, and Crossbones. And here we have some Thor villains, including the Executioner, two different versions of Hela, including one that won't stand up on her own back there. Then we've got Loki, Gore, and the Grandmaster. So this is the last batch of figures I have to show you. This is my kind of miscellaneous MCU villains. What's interesting about these guys is I don't have any of these characters in my collection otherwise. So I don't have comic book versions of these guys. So we've got Yellow Jacket from Ant-Man. We've got the Mandarin from Shang-Chi. I think this guy's name was Yon-Rogg. This was from the Captain Marvel movie. He was played by Jude Law, but obviously they did not secure his likeness rights, so he's got his mask on. Then we've got Talos, the Skrull. Then there's Baron Mordo from Doctor Strange. The Death Dealer, he was also from Shang-Chi. And lastly, we've got Killmonger from the Black Panther movie. So here is the finished product. Now, like my heroic shelf, I tried to balance it out nicely, but by forcing them into like team specific cubbies, it wasn't perfect. Like you'll notice, I have quite a bit of room on this X-Men shelf here, so it leaves it looking a little uneven. So I ran into a similar problem here. So I've got a bunch of Marvel villains up here, or Spider-Man villains, I guess I should say. More Spidey villains up in here. More Spider-Man villains up in here. Then we go down here. This is kind of the last of my Spider-Man villains. Then I've got all my Venoms and Carnages. And this shelf here is the one that's a little lacking. This is all my other symbiotes. Now I could maybe fill that up if I brought some of these characters that I have displayed on the top of my shelf, such as Venom Pool and Toxin back there. But I'm going to leave them as is for now. I might have to rebalance this a little bit later. Then we've got 3 different shelves of X-Men villains. Now this was mostly cosmic villains. And then from here, it starts getting a lot more muddled. There's some cosmic guys back there, Daredevil villains, other miscellaneous villains. Another kind of miscellaneous shelf. More miscellaneous villains here. Miscellaneous here. Miscellaneous here. And before I did this reshuffle, I had no figures on the bottom shelf except for a couple of large figures in the front, kind of like you see what I've got here with just the Hulk and the Thing. I didn't have any characters on the bottom shelf before, but now I've got quite a few figures packed onto these last 2 cubbies. I still have one hollow one for my superhero shelf, but on my villain shelf, I did have to pack it pretty tightly. So that's an MCU shelf behind these 2 characters. More MCU characters back there hiding behind Shuma Gorath. And then a few miscellaneous Marvel comic book villains here behind Crimson Dynamo and Titanium Man. So overall, here is my Marvel Legends collection. I hope you enjoyed going through it with me shelf by shelf. And hopefully I don't have to do that again anytime soon. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, leave me comments below, and thank you very much for watching. Until next time, ciao.